The heavy steel of federal handcuffs clicked shut, a sharp, mechanical snap that echoed across the Arlington marble. Logan Trent, a man who just 45 minutes earlier had boasted 2-3 million live viewers about his untouchable status, was currently drowning in his own panic. His knees scraped against the pristine walkway, his designer sneakers scuffed and dragging. Snot mixed with sweat on his upper lip. "You can't do this. My channel. They just terminated my channel. Do you know how much money that is?" He thrashed against the unyielding grip of two military police officers, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whine. "It was just a prank. I have the First Amendment." 10 yards away, Specialist Jamal Hayes didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. His posture remained a rigid vertical line of dark blue fabric, silver brass, and absolute discipline. He was a sentinel at the tomb of the unknown soldier. And the weeping man on the ground was no longer a threat, he was merely a solved security breach. 45 minutes earlier, the only sound surrounding Jamal had been the steady, rhythmic scrape of metal on metal. Inside the subterranean quarters beneath the amphitheater, insulated from the summer heat and the murmuring crowds above, Jamal sat on a steel folding chair. He was hunched over his left shoe, a jeweler's file pinched tightly between his thumb and forefinger. He was meticulously shaving down a microscopic burr on the steel heel plate. It was an imperfection so small that most soldiers wouldn't have noticed it with a magnifying glass. But Jamal knew that if that tiny jagged edge caught the rubber mat during a facing movement, the resulting sound would be wrong. It wouldn't be the crisp, authoritative click that defined the 21-step march. It would be a scrape. A scrape meant a flaw. And Jamal Hayes did not do flaws. He set the file down, wiping the metal dust away with a microfiber cloth. He picked up a lint roller, passing it over his pressed trousers for the 6th time, ensuring not a single speck of dust broke the deep blue surface. As he worked, his father's voice, a steady, commanding baritone from a man who had spent 20 years in the Navy, echoed in the back of his mind. "They look at the uniform, Jamal, but some of them, they see the skin first. You don't get to be just good, you make a mistake. They don't say you had a bad day. They say you're aggressive. They say you have an attitude problem. You have to be twice as perfect just to stand on the same starting line." Jamal had carried that heavy warning with him since his first day of basic training. Being a Black Tomb guard was just a physical endurance test of standing still in blistering heat or freezing snow. It was a relentless psychological tightrope. A few months prior, he had nearly faced disciplinary action simply because a superior misinterpreted his intense focus as hostility. He had beat the accusation by relying on raw, irrefutable data, his flawless service record, and his encyclopedic knowledge of the standard operating procedures. Every pivot, every weapon transition, every silent stare had to be bulletproof. There was no room for emotion. There was only the mission. He stood up, rolling his shoulders back until the joints popped in the quiet room. He walked over to the full-length mirror, checking his sentinel badge. He adjusted it a millimeter to the left, ensuring it sat perfectly flush with the pocket seam of his blouse. Finally, he reached out and picked up his M14 rifle. The familiar grounding weight of the wood and steel settled into his white-gloved hands. He cycled the bolt once, a sharp, violent mechanical sound that meant he was ready. The digital clock on the white cinderblock wall clicked to the top of the hour. Time for the guard change. The heavy wooden door of the quarters swung open, revealing the bright, blinding glare of the Virginia afternoon. The sunlight immediately caught the polished steel bayonet of Jamal's rifle as his right boot crossed the threshold, stepping firmly onto the black rubber mat. The heat radiating off the white marble plaza was suffocating, blurring the air directly above the stone, but Jamal's breathing remained slow and measured inside his heavy wool uniform. He brought his heels together. Click, a sharp, definitive sound that commanded immediate respect. He turned, facing down the black rubber mat, and began his count. 1, 2, 3. His heel struck the mat with perfectly calibrated force, rolling to the toe in a fluid, gliding motion that made it look as though his upper body was floating. The crowd gathered behind the velvet chains numbered in the hundreds, yet the silence was absolute. It was a heavy, reverent quiet, broken only by the rhythmic scuff of Jamal's metal heel plates and the distant hum of wind moving through the ancient oak trees of Arlington. 10, 11, 12. As Jamal marched, his head remained locked forward, eyes staring straight ahead at a fixed point on the horizon. But a tomb guard's peripheral vision is a highly trained tool. Sweeping his gaze without moving his pupils, he registered the faces in the front row. Standing directly behind the heavy iron chain was a young black boy. No older than 10, wearing a crisp white button-down shirt that looked 2 sizes too big for him. Next to him stood an older man with graying temples, his posture ramrod straight despite the heavy wooden cane in his right hand. The older man wore a faded olive drab jacket adorned with the patch of the 82nd Airborne Division. But it was the boy who caught Jamal's peripheral attention. The kid Marcus had his feet pressed tightly together. His small hands were balled into fists, pinned rigidly to the seams of his pants. His chin was tucked back, his chest puffed out, breathing shallowly. He was doing his absolute best to mirror Jamal's exact stance. The look in the boy's wide eyes was just curiosity. It was pure, unadulterated awe. He was looking at Jamal the way other kids looked at comic book superheroes. 19, 20, 21. Jamal stopped. He turned to face the tomb, bringing his rifle to port arms, then executing the shoulder arms movement. He held the position, frozen in time, for exactly 21 seconds. In that silence, Jamal felt the weight of the boy's stare. This was exactly why his father's words mattered. This was why the unbearable heat, the blisters, and the endless inspections were worth it. To that 10-year-old boy, Jamal was just a soldier. He was living proof of dignity, excellence, and belonging. He was a silent promise that someone who looked like them could stand guard over the nation's most sacred ground, commanding the absolute respect of everyone in attendance. Jamal internally counted down the final seconds. 3, 2, 1. He prepared to pivot and begin his return march. The atmosphere was perfectly suspended, a shared moment of profound honor between the living and the dead. Then a harsh, abrasive sound ripped through the plaza. Hello. Bro, there is no way people actually stand around watching this NPC behavior. The voice was loud, entirely devoid of self-awareness, and completely shattered the sacred quiet. Several people in the crowd gasped. The 82nd Airborne veteran tightened his grip on his cane, his jaw clenching. Marcus flinched, his perfect rigid posture breaking as he looked over his shoulder in confusion. Jamal did not react. He executed his pivot, snapping his heels together. Click. He shifted his rifle to his outside shoulder, placing himself between the tomb and whatever was causing the disturbance. As he took his first step back down the mat, he saw the source of the noise entering his peripheral field. A thick black carbon fiber selfie stick swung aggressively over the heads of the crowd, smacking hard against the top of the iron railing with a sharp metallic clank. A second later, an electronic, robotic text-to-speech voice blared from a smartphone speaker turned up to maximum volume. User Kingslayer99 donates $50. Bro, get the robot to do a backflip. Logan Trent shoved his way to the front of the viewing area, entirely ignoring the velvet rope grazing his thigh. He held a 3-camera streaming rig out at arm's length, his face illuminated by a harsh LED ring light attached to the mount, rendering him completely disconnected from the bright midday sun. He wore a neon yellow t-shirt plastered with the words Logan unfiltered across the chest. His eyes darted rapidly, not at the marble monument, but at the cascading waterfall of text on his primary screen. Yeah, chat, I see the 50, Logan said, his voice carrying the exaggerated, nasal projection of someone who spent 12 hours a day talking to a monitor. He tapped the screen to dismiss the robotic text-to-speech notification. But $50 doesn't fix the blast energy situation. They pulled the contract this morning. Said my last small prank was a liability. I need a clip today, boys. We need something that hits the algorithm hard. He pivoted on his expensive sneakers, panning the camera away from his own face and pointing it squarely at the plaza. The lens focused on Jamal, who was currently executing his rigid 21-step march. To Logan, the meticulous tradition was just a backdrop. Unmonetized dead space. Look at this guy, Logan sneered, adjusting his microphone pack. Just walking back and forth. 21 steps. Turn around. Do it again. Literally NPC behavior. You guys pay taxes for this. We're funding a human metronome. Honestly, bro could be replaced by a Roomba and nobody would notice the difference. A few tourists flanking Logan shot him venomous glares. A mother pulled her teenage daughter a step away, putting distance between them and the streamer. Logan thrived on that reaction. It meant engagement. He checked his viewer count. The number was ticking upward, climbing past 40,000. The chat was a blur of emotes and toxic encouragement. Out on the black mat, Jamal maintained his pace. His heel struck the rubber. Click. He did not alter his stride by a fraction of an inch. His breathing remained a slow, controlled inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. He had been trained to block out the sounds of crying families, low-flying aircraft, and thunderstorms. An obnoxious civilian with a camera was nothing more than an insect buzzing outside a closed window. Logan noticed the lack of reaction. The streamer leaned over the velvet chain, trying to get his camera closer to the guard's face. "Yo, robot," Logan shouted, cupping his free hand around his mouth. "Are you deaf under that hat? I'm talking to you. Do I spin? Drop the gun. Give the people what they want." Jamal reached the end of the mat. He executed a perfect halt, bringing his rifle across his chest, two port arms. He turned to face the tomb. 21 seconds of absolute stillness. The heavy wood and steel of the M14 rested flawlessly against his shoulder. He did not look at Logan. He did not acknowledge the camera. He simply existed in a realm of discipline that Logan could not comprehend. The streamer's smile faltered slightly. Usually by this point, mall security guards were yelling at him, or store managers were threatening to call the police. That gave him the conflict he needed for a viral thumbnail. But this soldier was giving him absolutely nothing. A blank wall of blue fabric. Logan lowered the camera slightly, narrowing his eyes as he zoomed in on the brass nameplate pinned to the right breast of the guard's uniform. The gold lettering caught the sun. Logan let out a dry, rattling laugh. He brought the camera back to his own face, adjusting his hair in the monitor's reflection. "All right, chat," Logan murmured into the microphone, his tone dropping the loud bravado for something sharper, more calculated. "Hayes thinks he's tough. He thinks he can just ignore us. Let's see if this guy can take the heat." The chat on Logan's screen exploded with a flurry of toxic suggestions. They knew the drill. When loud didn't work, Logan shifted to the personal. He was a master of the dog whistle, using language that just barely skirted the edge of platform bans but carried enough venom to force a reaction. Logan leaned back against the iron railing, casually crossing his ankles. He pointed the camera back at Jamal, who had just begun his return march down the mat. "You know, chat, it all makes sense now," Logan said, his voice loud enough to carry clearly across the silent plaza, dripping with mock realization. "I was wondering why this guy's pacing was so slow. Look at him. You think they put him here because he's the best they've got?" Nah, Logan let out a short, dismissive scoff. "The military's got to hit those diversity quotas now. HR probably came down and said, hey, we need to look good for the brochures. So they slap a uniform on an affirmative action hire and tell him to walk in a straight line. Look at that posture. Bro is just trying not to get fired from his government handout, On the black mat, Jamal was on his 9th step. 9, 10, 11. He heard every word. The insults didn't just bounce off, they burrowed directly into the deepest, most guarded insecurity he carried. The voice of his father echoed violently in his skull. They see the skin first. You have to be twice as perfect. Jamal's breathing, usually a rhythmic pendulum, caught for a fraction of a second. Beneath the pristine white cot of his gloves, his knuckles turned a mottled, bloodless white as his grip on their M14 stock tight. The muscles in his forearms coiled like steel cables, straining against the sleeves of his blouse. A single, thick vein bulged against the side of his neck, pulsing rapidly against his high collar. He wanted to break form. The urge to snap the rifle down crossed the boundary. And physically eject the arrogant child from the cemetery was a physical ache in his chest. It would take less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds to shatter Logan's jaw and wipe that smirk off his face. 12, 13, 14. Jamal forced his eyes to remain locked straight ahead. He pushed the rage down into his boots, driving his heel into the rubber mat with a slightly heavier, more punishing click. He would not be the angry black man on camera. He would not give this parasite the satisfaction of ruining a career built on blood, sweat, and absolute perfection. He swallowed hard, keeping his facial muscles completely paralyzed. But the crowd was no longer passive. The reverent silence of Arlington had morphed into a pressure cooker of collective disgust. A middle-aged man in a suit muttered an expletive, taking a step toward Logan before his wife grabbed his arm, pulling him back. A group of high school students on a field trip stood frozen, exchanging uncomfortable, wide-eyed glances. The whispers rippled through the spectators, a rising tide of anger directed entirely at the streamer. Logan ignored them. The view counter on his screen had just crossed 60,000. He was trending. He pushed off the railing, taking a step closer to the velvet chain. Look, he's getting mad, Logan laughed, zooming in on Jamal's rigid jawline. I can see you sweating, Hayes. What's the matter? Did I strike a nerve? Come on, do something. Speak on. Prove you actually earned that badge. Logan reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. I'll give you $100 right now if you bark like a dog, Hayes. 200. The chat wants to hear it. The absolute disrespect hung in the humid air, vile and suffocating. Jamal reached the end of the mat, initiating his facing movement. He did not look at the money. He did not look at Logan. But someone else did. A heavy wooden cane slammed down onto the marble pavement with a sharp, echoing crack. The gray-haired veteran in the 82nd Airborne jacket let go of his grandson's shoulder. His movements were slow, burdened by decades of joint pain, but his eyes were entirely devoid of hesitation. He stepped past the other tourists, moving directly into the space between the streamer and the velvet chain. He planted his boots, squared his shoulders, and raised a massive, calloused hand directly in front of Logan's camera lens. The older man's thick, calloused palm covered the center of the ring light, instantly casting a shadow over Logan's face. The veteran didn't shove the streamer. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood his ground, a physical barrier of faded olive-drab cot and quiet authority, protecting the airspace between the camera and the velvet chain. Logan stumbled backward, his sneakers squeaking sharply against the marble. He immediately checked his monitor to ensure the stream hadn't dropped, then looked up, his face twisting into a sneer of exaggerated victimhood. Well, hey, it's all. Chat, did you see that? This boomer just laid hands on me, Logan shouted, aggressively pointing his camera directly into the veteran's weathered face. The ring light cast harsh, blinding reflections off the older man's glasses. What, you jump out of a plane 50 years ago and think you own a public sidewalk? Get out of my frame. Grandpa. Nobody cares about your dusty little jacket, the veteran's jaw tight, the muscles in his neck cording, but he kept his silence. He had seen real combat. He was going to be goaded into a street brawl by a boy wielding a selfie stick. He took a slow, deliberate half-step forward, using his heavy wooden cane to anchor his weight, pushing Logan slightly further away from the chain. But Logan didn't retreat. Instead, he leaned sideways, finding a new angle around the veteran's broad shoulders. His lens locked onto Marcus. The 10-year-old boy was paralyzed. The reverence he had felt just moments before was entirely gone, replaced by the sheer, overwhelming panic of an adult screaming just inches away. Logan thrust the camera downward, shoving the microphone toward the child's face. "What about you, kid? You gonna cry? Your grandpa's out here catching federal charges for touching my property. You learning how to be a loser too." Marcus flinched violently. He took a rapid, unbalanced step backward to get away from the blinding light and the shouting voice. His oversized dress shoe caught the sharp edge of the marble threshold beneath the viewing area. His ankle rolled. The boy pitched backward, his arms flailing wildly for balance. He hit the ground hard. The sharp, sickening sound of tearing fabric and scraping skin echoed across the plaza as Marcus's knee dragged heavily against the abrasive stone. A small, involuntary cry of pain escaped the boy's lips. Out on the black rubber mat, Jamal was on step 18. 18, 19. Through the extreme periphery of his vision, Jamal saw the small white shirt go down. He heard the tear of the pants. He heard the sharp intake of breath from the veteran, who immediately dropped to one knee, abandoning his defensive line to gather his grandson into his arms. 20, 21. Jamal executed his halt. He brought his M14 to port arms, moving the weapon across his chest. Beneath the heavy wool of his uniform, his core temperature spiked. The blood pounded behind his eyes in a deafening rhythm. This was just a disrespectful tourist anymore. This was a direct, physical threat to a child who had come to pay his respects. The primal, protective instinct of a soldier screamed at Jamal to break his post. It would take exactly 4 strides to cross the rubber mat, vault the chain, and put Logan on his back. He could see the streamer grinning in his peripheral vision, entirely unbothered by the bleeding child on the ground, panning the camera to catch the boy's tears for his audience. Jamal's grip on the rifle stock became crushing. The polished wood dug painfully into the bones of his hands. His lungs burned as he restricted his breathing, trapping the explosive anger inside his chest. He was a sentinel. He did not move without orders. He did not break the silence. But the silence was already broken. Marcus was weeping softly into his grandfather's shoulder, a terrified, stifled sound that cut deeper than any gunshot. And right above them, Logan was leaning in again, the camera phone hovering dangerously close to the veteran's ear. Jamal stood facing the tomb of the unknown soldier. The 21 seconds of mandatory stillness had begun. Normally, this duration was a mental sanctuary. It was a block of time where Jamal would center his breathing, focus on the weight of the rifle, and visualize the precise geometry of his next movement. But today, the sanctuary was breached. The timer in his head competed with the sound of the streamer's frantic, high-pitched commentary and the boy's quiet sobbing. 12, 13, 14. Jamal's mind raced. He was running through the standard operating procedures at lightning speed, searching for their exact protocol to address a civilian actively causing harm without crossing the physical boundary. He needed a reason to issue a verbal warning. Logan was loud, yes, but Arlington security usually handled noise complaints. Jamal needed the streamer to cross a tangible line. 18, 19, 20. The anger was a physical weight, throwing off his internal equilibrium. Jamal prepared for the facing movement. He shifted his weight to his right foot, preparing to pivot and bring his left heel sharply into the right. It was a movement he had executed flawlessly over 10,000 times. It required absolute, emotionless precision. 21. Jamal pivoted. His left boot swept across the rubber mat. But the anger had tightened his hip flexor just a fraction of an inch too much. His foot traveled a millimeter lower than usual. Instead of a clean, airborne sweep ending in a sharp, authoritative click of metal striking metal, the steel horseshoe on Jamal's left heel grazed the black rubber mat. Scuff glag. It was a micro mistake. To a tourist half a football field away. It was inaudible. But in the hushed, tense atmosphere of their immediate viewing area, the dragging sound was unmistakable. The rhythm was broken. The perfect illusion of the mechanical soldier fractured for a tenth of a second. Logan heard it. His eyes lit up with predatory glee. Oh, look at that, Logan shrieked, instantly swinging his camera away from the veteran and zooming entirely onto Jamal's boots. The robot glitched. Did you guys hear that? Their affirmative action hire doesn't even know how to walk straight. Man is literally shaking right now. A hot, agonizing wave of shame washed over the back of Jamal's neck. You have to be twice as perfect. He had just proved the arrogant streamer right in front of thousands of people because he let his emotions dictate his muscles. He had allowed a civilian to break his focus. Jamal stood at the end of the mat, his back to the crowd, preparing to transition his rifle to his outside shoulder for the return march. He had a choice. He could let the shame consume him, stiffen his posture in panic, and risk another, larger mistake. Or he could bury it. Jamal took a single, slow, imperceptible breath in through his nose. He visualized their anger, the shame, and the noise as physical objects, and he mentally locked them inside a heavy steel box. When he exhaled, his heart rate plummeted. The tension bled out of his shoulders. He didn't just recover. He became colder, more precise. He transitioned the M14 with a violent, snapping force that echoed like a whip crack across the plaza, a stark contrast to his previous fluid motions. When he stepped off for his next 21-step sequence, the impact of his heel on the mat was punishingly exact. Clegg. The sheer, intimidating perfection of the recovery sent a chill through the bystanders. It was the march of a man doing a job anymore. It was the march of a predator locked in a cage. Logan, completely oblivious to the shift in atmospheric pressure, was busy reading his screen, a wide, manic smile plastered across his face. Oh snap, Logan laughed, tapping the glass of his phone. User Toxic Viper just dropped $500. He says, I bet you $500 you can make him talk. Push it, say less, bro. I'm about to break this guy in half, before Logan could fully read out the next vulgar comment from his chat. A man in a navy blue polo shirt bearing the Arlington National Cemetery logo pushed his way through the stunned spectators. His name tag read Davis. He was a civilian grounds manager, but his expression carried the stern, exhausted weight of someone who spent his days protecting the dignity of the dead from the carelessness of the living. Sir, that is enough, Davis said, his voice firm, pointing a finger directly at Logan's chest. You are causing a severe disturbance. Step away from the barrier and turn that camera off. You need to leave the plaza right now, the crowd murmured in agreement. The veteran was still kneeling on the marble, carefully wiping a small trickle of blood from Marcus's scraped knee with a folded handkerchief, his jaw locked in silent fury. The arrival of the cemetery staff felt like a release valve. Order was about to be restored. But Logan didn't flinch. In fact, his smile grew wider. This was his element. This was exactly what his viewers paid to see. He didn't yell. He didn't throw a punch. Instead, he smoothly reached into the front pocket of his cargo shorts and pulled out a small, heavily creased laminated card. He held it up to the camera lens first, then shoved it toward Davis's face. Hold on, buddy. Don't touch me, Logan said, his voice dropping an octave into a practiced, authoritative cadence. I am in a publicly accessible area. I am conducting an independent journalistic audit under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. I am on a public easement. Are you a federal employee ordering me to cease a constitutionally protected activity under the threat of color of law? Davis blinked. The rapid-fire legal jargon hit him like a physical blow. His hand, which had been reaching for Logan's shoulder, froze in midair. "You are disrupting a sacred ceremony. You injured a child," Davis countered, though their initial sharp edge of his authority had noticeably dulled. "I didn't touch the kid. He tripped because he's clumsy." "Roll that tape, chat, we have it in 4K, Logan sneered, not taking his eyes off Davis. "And as for the ceremony, the Supreme Court has ruled extensively on First Amendment rights in traditional public forums. Snyder v. Phelps. Look it up, man. Unless I cross that chain or physically assault someone, you cannot legally remove me. If you put your hands on me, I will file a Title 42 Section 1983 lawsuit against you personally, and I will own your pension." Davis's hand dropped to his side. He was a grounds manager, trained to handle lost tourists and direct foot traffic, not to navigate complex constitutional litigation with a professional provocateur holding a camera. He knew the strict rules regarding physical engagement with civilians. If he touched Logan and it went viral, the legal fallout for the cemetery and for himself would be catastrophic. Logan read the hesitation instantly. He thrived on it. "That's what I thought," Logan mocked, tapping the side of his phone. "Look at him, chat. The tough guy in the polo shirt is backing down." "They all back down when you know your rights." Davis took a slow step backward, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and intense frustration. He unclipped the heavy Motorola radio from his belt, pressed the push-to-talk button, and turned his shoulder to shield his mouth. "Dispatch, this is Plaza 2. I need MP support at the viewing area. We have an uncooperative individual citing First Amendment auditor protocols. Please advise." Logan laughed, a sharp, grating sound that bounced off the marble columns. He had effectively neutralized the immediate threat of security. The rules of engagement were entirely in his favor, and he knew how to exploit every single one of them. He slid the laminated card back into his pocket, completely ignoring the bleeding boy and the glaring grandfather. Feeling absolutely invincible, Logan whistled a bright, off-key tune. He turned his back on the manager and stepped right up to the velvet chain, pressing his thighs against the heavy fabric. With the civilian manager effectively paralyzed on the radio and the crowd reduced to helpless onlookers, Logan realized he had a shrinking window of opportunity. The military police were coming. When the MP arrived, they wouldn't argue case law, they would just remove him. He needed the viral payoff right now. The $500 bounty to make the Black Tomb Guard break character was hovering at the top of his chat screen. He looked out at the black rubber mat. Jamal was executing another perfect 21-step sequence. His face was a mask of carved mahogany. The earlier micro slip of his heel was gone, replaced by a terrifying, robotic precision. Words weren't working. Logic wasn't working. Insults weren't working. Logan unzipped the small, tactical-style sling bag strapped tightly across his chest. He dug past a tangle of charging cables and pulled out a heavy, cylindrical Bluetooth speaker. It was a high-end model, the kind designed to project bass across crowded outdoor parties. He gripped it in his left hand, thumbing the power button. A loud electronic chime signaled the device pairing to his phone. Several people in the crowd realized what he was doing and began shouting protests, but Logan simply turned the volume rocker on his phone all the way to maximum. He queued up a track, looking directly into his camera. "You guys want him to break. Let's give him a soundtrack." Logan hit play. The silence of Arlington National Cemetery was not just broken, it was violently shattered. A heavy, distorted hip-hop bass line erupted from the speaker, accompanied by a rapid-fire string of explicit lyrics. The acoustic architecture of the marble amphitheater, designed to carry the soft sounds of acoustic bugles and quiet prayers, acted as a massive amplifier. The vulgar bass rattled the iron railings. Logan began to bob his head, aggressively thrusting the speaker over the velvet chain, pointing it directly at Jamal as the guard marched past. "Yo, let's go. Walk to the beat, robot." "Show us what you got," Logan screamed over the music, panning the camera rapidly between the speaker and the sentinel. Out on the mat, the sound waves physically hit Jamal. The heavy bass vibrated against the polished steel plate of his rifle and resonated in his chest cavity. The sheer disrespect was a physical violation of the space. Every instinct, every ounce of human dignity, demanded that he turn and silence the noise. "Stay in the box," Jamal told himself, his eyes locked on the horizon. "He wants you to lose control. He wants the angry reaction." Jamal took step 15. 16. Seeing that the music still was eliciting a reaction, Logan pushed the limit to its absolute breaking point. He needed a physical response. He needed Jamal to lunge at him. Still holding the camera high, Logan leaned his upper body heavily over the velvet rope. He looked down at his feet. The chain represented the absolute threshold between the public viewing area and the restricted federal grounds of the tomb. Logan smirked. He slowly, deliberately slid his right foot forward. The toe of his neon-accented sneaker crossed the invisible vertical plane of the chain. He didn't just hover it, he planted the tip of his shoe firmly on the pristine white marble on the restricted side. Through his peripheral vision, Jamal registered the movement. The rules of engagement for a tomb guard were incredibly strict, but they were also meticulously clear. Verbal harassment was a matter of discipline. Noise was a matter for cemetery security. But a physical intrusion into the restricted guard path was a breach of national security protocols. The equation in Jamal's head instantly shifted. He no longer needed to suppress his response. The standard operating procedures had just handed him the authority he needed. The leash was off. Jamal was on step 18. He did not complete the 21-step count. Right in the middle of the black rubber mat. With their explicit rap music echoing off the marble columns and the crowd in a state of absolute shock, Jamal's heavy metal heel slammed down into the rubber, stopping his forward momentum instantly. He froze mid-stride. The sudden, violent cessation of movement was so unnatural, so incredibly abrupt, that their entire plaza seemed to gasp at once. Everyone, including Logan, held their breath. The sudden, violent halt of Jamal's momentum was unnatural. To the human eye, a body in motion is supposed to decelerate. Jamal did not. He simply locked his joints, absorbing the kinetic energy of his own mass entirely within the heavy wool of his uniform and the steel of his boots. The heavy, distorted bassline of the rap music continued to pump from Logan's speaker, vibrating against the marble columns, but the psychological atmosphere in the plaza had instantly shifted. Jamal did not turn his head. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, locked onto the pristine white stone of the amphitheater. The standard operating procedures dictated exactly how a sentinel was to address a civilian breach, and it did not involve making eye contact with a provocateur. It required absolute, impersonal authority. He shifted his weight. His right boot lifted just an inch off the ground, and he drove his metal heel plate down into the black rubber mat with maximum allowable force. Crack. The sound was explosive. It was a sharp, percussive detonation of steel against dense rubber and concrete that cut entirely through the heavy frequency of the hip-hop track. Several people in the front row physically jumped. Simultaneously, Jamal brought his hands up, snapping the heavy M14 rifle across his chest into the port arms position. The complex mechanics of the weapon, the wood, the steel receiver, the sling swivel clattered together in a singular, intimidating mechanical sequence. It was the universal, unmistakable sound of a soldier preparing for action. Then he unleashed the warning. He didn't shout. Shouting implied a loss of control. Shouting meant anger. Jamal used the diaphragm-driven projection taught to drill sergeants, a technique designed to be heard clearly over the deafening roar of helicopter rotors and heavy machinery. It is requested that everyone maintains a level of silence and respect. His voice was a physical force. deep, resonant, and carrying a terrifying metallic edge. It slammed into the crowd. The command did not sound like it came from a 26-year-old man. It sounded like it came from the institution of the military itself. The physiological response was automatic. Before Logan's brain could even process the words, his central nervous system reacted to the sheer dominance of the sound. He flinched violently. His shoulders hitched up to his ears, and he took a rapid, stumbling step backward. As he retreated, the toe of his neon sneaker dragged back over the velvet chain, entirely clearing the restricted zone. His hand trembled, and the heavy cylindrical Bluetooth speaker nearly slipped from his sweaty fingers, dipping toward the marble floor before he caught it against his chest. For 2 seconds, Logan was genuinely terrified. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of a bully who had just realized he kicked a sleeping wolf. The crowd held its collective breath. The gray-haired veteran, still kneeling next to Marcus, looked up at Jamal with a tight, approving nod. The boy's crying had stopped entirely, replaced by wide-eyed or at the sheer volume of the soldier's voice. But the fear on Logan's face didn't last. As the echo of Jamal's command faded into the heavy Virginia air, Logan looked at his phone screen. The chat was moving so fast it was completely unreadable. The viewer count had just spiked past 80,000. Their algorithm was heavily pushing the live feed. The adrenaline of terror morphed into the adrenaline of extreme greed. Logan realized what just happened. He had the clip. He had the Black Tomb guard breaking his silence, snapping his rifle, and shouting directly at him. Out of context, cut to a 10-second short, it was pure algorithmic gold. But Logan needed to ensure he controlled the narrative. If he looked scared, he lost. He needed to look like the victim of an out-of-control, authoritarian system. He steadied his breathing. His eyes narrowed, focusing entirely on the lens of his camera. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a dark, calculated maliciousness. "Did you guys see that?" Logan's voice cracked perfectly, shedding the obnoxious frat boy tone and instantly adopting the frantic, high-pitched cadence of a terrified civilian. He gripped his selfie stick with both hands, pointing the camera back at his own face, making sure the ring light illuminated the artificial panic in his eyes. "Chat, record this." "Screen record right now," Logan yelled, backing away from the velvet chain, as if Jamal were actively pursuing him. "The guard just threatened my life. He cocked his weapon at me. You all saw it." He brandished a loaded firearm at an unarmed civilian just for standing here. Behind the velvet rope, Jamal remained frozen in the port arms position. His face was entirely devoid of expression. But behind his eyes, a rapid tactical assessment was taking place. He knew exactly what Logan was doing. This was the modern ambush. There were no bullets, only bandwidth. The streamer was laying a trap constructed entirely of optics and racial bias. If Jamal took one step toward that chain to apprehend the man for the physical boundary breach, the narrative was sealed. Millions of people would see an aggressive black soldier vaulting, a barrier to assault a retreating, terrified kid. The context of the rap music, the injured boy, and the deliberate provocation would be edited out. The military would have no choice but to suspend Jamal pending a massive public relations investigation. His career, his immaculate record, the pride in his father's eyes, all of it would be burned to the ground for a viral TikTok. Jamal held his ground. He did not lower the rifle. He did not change his facial expression. He became a statue of discipline, refusing to feed the camera a single defensive gesture. "I have the right to film," Logan continued to scream, pacing aggressively back and forth along the marble walkway, agitating the crowd further. "He's trying to intimidate me. This is police brutality. Call the Arlington PD. I want this guy arrested. Someone call the cops, tell them we have an active threat at the tomb." The cemetery grounds manager, Davis, who was still on the radio with dispatch, stared at Logan in absolute disbelief. The sheer audacity of the lie was staggering, but Logan was committing to the performance with psychotic dedication. He was waving his arms, spinning in circles to show his viewers the hostile environment, and repeatedly thrusting the heavy camera rig in Jamal's general direction to emphasize his outrage. "I'm literally shaking right now," Logan lied, aggressively shaking the selfie stick to create a chaotic, shaky cam effect for his stream. "They put these aggressive guys in uniform and give them guns. This is why I do audits, chat." To expose these unhinged, he threw his right arm out for a dramatic, sweeping gesture toward the tomb. It was a violent, uncoordinated movement. Logan's palms were slick with sweat from the summer heat and his own manufactured adrenaline. The heavy smartphone, enclosed in a thick, weighted aluminum cage to support the ring light and microphone, shifted its center of gravity. The cheap plastic clamp holding the phone to the carbon fiber rod groaned. Logan felt the shift, but his momentum was already carrying his arm forward. He tried to tighten his grip, his fingers scrambling over the smooth plastic handle, but he was a fraction of a second too late. With a sharp snap, the clamp gave way. The heavy aluminum cage holding the $2,000 phone, the high-end microphone, and the active live stream broadcasting to 90,000 people detached from the pole. It flew in a slow, agonizing arc through the heavy, humid air. Logan's mouth dropped open, the fake panic instantly replaced by genuine, unadulterated horror. He lunged forward, grasping at the empty air, his fingertips brushing the edge of the phone case. He missed. The device sailed over the thick velvet chain. It cleared the white marble threshold. It plummeted downward, hitting the ground with a harsh, cracking thud that echoed sharply in the quiet that had fallen over the crowd. The phone skidded, flipping once, twice, before coming to a complete stop perfectly flat on its back. It lay exactly in the center of the black rubber mat. The restricted federal zone of the Sentinel. The heavy aluminum camera cage lay perfectly flat on its back, directly in the center of the black rubber mat. The wide-angle lens stared blindly up at the blinding Virginia sun. The live stream was still active, broadcasting a static, blown-out view of the sky to nearly 90,000 people. Logan stood frozen behind the velvet chain. The high-pitched manufactured panic completely drained from his face, replaced by a cold, leaden reality. That phone was not just a $2,000 piece of hardware. It was his bank account. It was the only proof he had to counter the cemetery manager's incoming police report. More importantly, it was the umbilical cord to his audience. If the battery died, or if the military police confiscated it before he could end the broadcast and save the local file, the footage was gone. The viral clip of the Black Tomb Guard yelling at him would be trapped in federal evidence. His channel, already demonetized and bleeding sponsorships, would not survive the week. "Sir, do not cross that boundary," Davis, the cemetery manager, shouted. He dropped his radio to his hip and took a frantic step forward, recognizing the desperate calculation forming in the streamer's eyes. "Leave the device. Their authorities will handle it." Logan didn't look at Davis. He didn't look at the crowd, which was now murmuring in a mixture of anticipation and dread. He only looked at the phone. It was just 3 feet away. One quick step over the chain, a quick grab, and he could retreat back to his First Amendment safe space. The heavy, distorted bass line of the rap music was still playing from the Bluetooth speaker gripped in Logan's left hand, vibrating aggressively against his palm. He opened his fingers. The heavy cylindrical speaker dropped, striking the marble threshold with a sharp, plastic crunch. The music instantly died, cutting off mid-lyric. The profound, heavy silence of Arlington rushed back into the plaza, amplifying the sound of Logan's heavy breathing. He made the calculation. He ducked his head, throwing his right shoulder forward, and slipped completely beneath the heavy velvet chain. The moment both of his neon sneakers planted firmly on the black rubber mat, their entire legal and physical reality of the situation shifted. Logan Trent was no longer a loud, obnoxious tourist exercising a warped interpretation of free speech on a public easement. He was an unauthorized civilian physically intruding upon a restricted, federally protected zone. He had just committed a federal crime. 10 yards away, Specialist Jamal Hayes registered the breach. The strict ceremonial protocols of the Tomb Guard vanished, instantly overridden by the base security mandates of the United States Army. The perimeter was compromised. An active physical obstacle was now blocking the designated patrol path. The man who had been verbally harassing him, insulting his race, and endangering a child was now standing in the restricted zone. Jamal did not pivot. He did not execute a ceremonial facing movement. He simply stepped forward. His boots struck the rubber mat, but the rhythm was entirely different. The slow, gliding 21-step cadence was gone. These were rapid, punishing, tactical strides. The metal horseshoe plates on his heels bit into the rubber with a heavy, aggressive crunch with every step. The sound was predatory, the auditory footprint of 200 pounds of hardened muscle and steel, moving with absolute, terrifying purpose. Hearing the heavy boots accelerating toward him, Logan panicked. The arrogant confidence of his online persona evaporated. He dropped to his hands and knees, his fingernails scraping frantically against the dense rubber as he lunged for the aluminum camera rig. His sweaty fingers found the metal grip. He yanked the rig upward, but in his haste, his left knee slipped off the edge of the mat, banging painfully into the marble step. He lost his balance, tumbling forward onto his shoulder. He scrambled to push himself backward, clutching the phone to his chest like a shield. He looked up. Jamal was there. The sentinel towered over him, entirely blocking out the sun. The shadow of the wide-brimmed cap fell over Logan's face. Jamal's chest was heaving slightly, the muscles in his forearms straining against the fabric of his blouse as he gripped the M14 rifle. Logan let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. All his talk of lawsuits, all his aggressive posturing for the chat, vanished in the face of raw, physical consequence. He squeezed his eyes tightly shut, threw his free arm over his face, and curled into a tight ball. He braced his body, fully expecting the heavy wooden stock of the rifle to crash down and shatter his jaw. No blow fell. Logan squeezed his eyes tighter, his shoulders hitched up to his ears, waiting for the agonizing impact of polished wood and steel. The only sound was the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the soldier standing above him, and the low, collective gasp of the spectators behind the velvet chain. A full 2 seconds passed. Slowly, Logan peeked through the gap in his trembling fingers. Jamal's black boot, shined to a mirror finish, was planted exactly 1 inch from Logan's kneecap. The soldier had not swung the weapon. He had not thrown a punch. He had not laid a single finger on the streamer. Instead, Jamal executed a violent, kinetic manual of arms movement. He snapped the M14 diagonally across his chest into a perfectly locked port arms position. The mechanical clack of the rifle's sling swivel striking the wooden stock echoed like a gunshot. Jamal took a deliberate half-step forward. He did not touch Logan. He simply used his massive physical presence and the dense, unyielding barrier of the rifle to occupy the space. Logan gasped, automatically crab walking backward to avoid contact with the weapon. His palms scraped harshly against the abrasive marble, leaving faint streaks of blood on the stone. Jamal took another half step. Logan scrambled further back, his chest heaving, his sneakers squeaking desperately against the ground. The physical dominance was absolute. Jamal was hurting him, driving him away from the tomb, and pinning him against the low stone, retaining wall of the viewing area. Logan's back slammed into the granite block. He was trapped, sitting entirely on the ground, the broken camera rig resting uselessly in his lap. Jamal stood over him, looking down. The utter lack of emotion on the sentinel's face was far more terrifying than anger. There was no rage to exploit. There was no loss of control to capture on film. There was only a cold, mechanical execution of duty. Jamal's voice boomed again. This time he did not request silence. He delivered a legal absolute. Title 36 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 38.6, Jamal projected, his voice ringing with crisp, commanding articulation. You have willfully bypassed a physical barrier and trespassed upon a restricted monument of the United States government. The words hit Logan harder than a physical strike. The two-chin-on-s-one First Amendment script he had memorized was useless here. Jamal wasn't engaging in an argument about free speech or public easements. The soldier was establishing a documented, verbal record of a federal offense for the dozens of civilian cameras now recording the scene. I dropped my phone, Logan stammered, his voice cracking into a weak, pathetic whine. He held up the aluminum cage, his hands shaking violently. I was just getting my property. You can't touch me, Jamal did not respond. He didn't need to. He simply held his ground, a towering wall of blue uniform and polished brass, staring through the broken streamer as if he were nothing more than a piece of trash blown onto the plaza by the wind. Logan looked past Jamal's rigid posture. Over the sentinel's right shoulder, moving rapidly across the blinding white marble of the amphitheater steps, were 4 figures in dark uniforms. Sergeant Miller, the commander of the relief, was power walking toward the viewing area, his face a mask of absolute fury. Behind him were 3 heavily armed military police officers wearing tactical vests and duty belts. One of the MP was already unbuttoning the thick leather pouch on his right hip. He pulled out a set of heavy, double-hinged federal handcuffs, the metal links clinking sharply in his hand. Logan's stomach completely dropped. The realization hit him like a physical weight, crushing the air out of his lungs. There was no security guard to intimidate. There was no manager to threat with a lawsuit. The tactical justice Jamal had just delivered was merely the holding pattern. The real consequences had just arrived. The heavy, rapid footsteps of the military police cut through the lingering tension on the plaza. 4 officers clad in tactical vests with their radios aggressively crackling, descended upon the viewing area. Sergeant Miller, a man whose face looked as though it were carved from the same rigid marble as the amphitheater, led the charge. Do not move, the late MP barked, his hand resting firmly on the retention hood of his sidearm. Logan Trent didn't have the motor skills left to run, even if he wanted to. He was pressed flat against the low stone wall, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically between the heavily armed officers and the towering, unmoving figure of Specialist Jamal Hayes. 2 MP bypassed the velvet chain entirely, stepping onto the black rubber mat. They didn't gently ask Logan to stand. They gripped him by the fabric of his neon t-shirt and the straps of his tactical bag, hauling him to his feet with zero regard for his comfort. Hey, wait. I'm a journalist. I have a press pass in my car, Logan shrieked. The sudden violent shift in his reality was breaking his mind in real time. It was a prank. It was just a social experiment for my channel. The MP behind him didn't engage in the debate. He drove a knee firmly into the back of Logan's thigh, forcing the streamer to buckle forward. In one fluid, practiced motion, the officer wrenched Logan's arms behind his back. The heavy, double-hinged federal handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, biting painfully into his skin. Logan Trent, you are being detained for unauthorized entry into a restricted federal monument under Title 36 CFR, Sergeant Miller said, his voice flat and entirely devoid of sympathy. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it. You can't take my phone. That's my private property, Logan sobbed, twisting his neck as the second MP knelt on the mat to retrieve the aluminum camera cage. Miller stepped forward, taking the massive, cracked rig from his officer. He looked at the glowing screen. The live stream was still running. The chat was a chaotic blur of panicked messages, mock laughter, and people realizing they had just paid money to watch a man commit a federal offense. The viewer count sat at 94,000. This isn't your property anymore, mister. Trent, Miller said, holding the lens up so their entire audience could see the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off his badge. This is evidence of a federal crime. Broadcasting it live just saved the United States attorney a significant amount of paperwork. Miller reached out his thumb and pressed the screen. The broadcast instantly went black. For Logan, it was the digital equivalent of a death sentence. His channel, his income, and his untouchable online persona were severed in a single tap. As Logan was dragged away, his expensive sneakers dragging uselessly against the stone, he looked back over his shoulder, his face slick with tears and snot. He was looking at the MP. He was looking at Jamal. Jamal had not moved a single muscle during the arrest. He remained at port arms, his eyes locked on the horizon. As the wailing of the streamer faded into the distance, Jamal slowly, deliberately lowered his rifle. He took one step backward, his heel striking the mat. Click. He transitioned the weapon to his outside shoulder. Without a word, without a single glance at the crowd that had just witnessed the total destruction of an internet troll, Jamal stepped forward and resumed his 21-step march. The absolute mechanical perfection of his stride returned instantly. He was a sentinel. The threat was neutralized. The mission continued. The distant, muffled slam of a heavy police cruiser door echoed through the trees, followed by the faint chirp of a siren. Then the profound, reverent silence of Arlington washed back over the plaza, heavy and undisturbed. The heavy wooden door of the quarters swung open. The relief sentinel marched out onto the plaza, his boots striking the marble in perfect synchronization with the ticking clock of the changing ceremony. Jamal reached the center of the mat. He executed his facing movement, presenting his weapon for the meticulous, agonizingly slow inspection by the commander of the relief. Every inch of the M14 was scrutinized, every strap checked. Jamal's breathing was a slow, controlled rhythm, betraying absolutely none of the chemical adrenaline storm that had raged through his veins just 20 minutes prior. Pass, the commander muttered softly. The post was transferred. Jamal was relieved. He turned sharply, snapping his rifle to his shoulder, and began his march off the mat, heading toward the descending stone stairs that led to the subterranean quarters. As he walked past the velvet chain for the final time that hour, his peripheral vision caught a flash of white cot. The gray-haired veteran from the 82nd Airborne was still standing at the front of the viewing area. Next to him was Marcus. The 10-year-old boy's dress pants were torn at the knee, exposing a nasty, dried scrape. His oversized shirt was rumpled from the fall. But Marcus was not crying anymore. The boy had pushed himself all the way up to the velvet chain. He pulled his feet tightly together, locking his knees. He pushed his small chest out, completely ignoring the sting of his injured leg. Slowly, with a rigid, practiced stiffness, Marcus brought his right hand up, tapping his fingertips against his brow in a silent, deeply respectful military salute. Jamal's marching pace did not alter. His head did not turn. The rules explicitly forbade acknowledging the crowd. But as Jamal's eyes swept past the boy, his chin dipped down a micro-movement, no more than a quarter of an inch. It was an imperceptible nod, invisible to the tourists, invisible to the cameras, but crystal clear to the young boy standing behind the chain. Marcus lowered his hand, his eyes shining with a quiet, overwhelming pride. Jamal descended the stairs, the heavy wooden door of the quarters closing behind him, instantly cutting off the blinding sunlight and the heavy Virginia heat. The moment the latch clicked into place, Jamal stepped over to the clearing barrel, clearing his weapon. He set the heavy rifle in the rack. Only then did he peel the pristine white cot gloves from his hands. His fingers possessed a faint, almost invisible tremor, the inevitable crash that follows supreme, violently suppressed physical restraint. Sergeant Miller walked out from the small office in the back. He didn't carry a clipboard or a disciplinary report. He carried 2 black ceramic mugs. He handed one to Jamal. The dark, bitter coffee steamed in the cool, air-conditioned room. Miller took a sip from his own mug, leaning back against the cinder block wall. He didn't offer a dramatic speech. He didn't mention the news crews that were likely already gathering outside the cemetery gates, or the viral fallout that the military PR team was currently managing. Your father called my office about a month ago, Miller said quietly, looking down at his boots. He was worried about you. Worried that the pressure of this specific post and the way some people look at you was going to force you into a corner you couldn't march out of. Jamal held the warm mug, remaining silent. I'm going to call him back this afternoon, Miller continued, looking up, his eyes locking onto Jamal's. I'm going to tell him that his son just proved exactly why this uniform has no color in it other than honor. Flawless execution today, Hayes. Drink your coffee. Your next shift is in 40 minutes, Jamal nodded. He set the mug down on the steel table, pulled a fresh tin of polish from his locker, and sat down on the folding chair. He picked up his left boot, meticulously searching for a microscopic imperfection to erase before he walked the mat again. There are lines you never cross. And there are men who will sacrifice everything to ensure those lines hold. If you respect the silent, unbreakable discipline of those who guard our nation's heroes, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in Specialist Hayes' boots.